Hello. 2 years into my relationship with the woman I thought I would spend my life with, I found out she had been cheating. But the real shock? I didn't learn the truth until 3 months later, after she was already engaged to another guy. Even then, though, I made sure I got the last laugh. We met back in college. I was 24, she was 22, and at first, everything seemed like it was meant to be. I had just come out of a year-long toxic relationship, one where my ex had been drowning in depression. I cared about her, but her constant emotional state began to pull me under as well. I consider myself empathetic, and it became too much. I had to end it, though it was amicable. I needed a break from that darkness. That's when she entered my life. We lived in the same apartment complex, and I had helped her out a few times with small things. A ride here, a favor there. Eventually, she asked for a ride, and that one simple gesture sparked what became a deep friendship. I didn't see it coming, but soon enough, we were spending more and more time together. I would hang out with her at her place, even when she was closing up the sandwich shop where she worked. She had her own share of issues. She was on a break from school, claiming it was due to depression and a messy breakup from a failed engagement. Looking back, I can't help but question how much of that was even true. We bonded over her story of being cheated on by her ex-fiancé. I bought it back then, but now I wonder if any of it was real. We became inseparable pretty quickly. After only a couple of months, she introduced me to her parents. I didn't think much of it at the time, though we were still in that strange friends with benefits phase. I was already falling for her hard, so after a few more months, I wanted us to be official. I wasn't seeing anyone else and I didn't care to. I thought she felt the same way. But when I brought it up, she rejected the idea, saying she wasn't ready for another relationship after her broken engagement. That should have been my first red flag, but I brushed it off, convincing myself it made sense. I figured she just needed time. We continued like this, exclusive but never officially a couple. I thought things were perfect. She seemed to share my interests, my goals, and we connected on what felt like every level. I started to feel like she was the one. But at the same time, there were little things that nagged at me. She would make casual, backhanded remarks, comparing me to her exes. It was subtle, but enough to make me feel insecure. We'd argue over small things, and whenever I tried to calm the situation down, she'd storm out of my apartment. At first, I'd chase after her, but when she complained that I wasn't giving her space, I stopped. Then she accused me of not caring enough. It was like nothing I did was right. Looking back, I can see how toxic things were, but at the time, I just kept pushing forward. I was too invested. She started gaslighting me, convincing me that things I knew had happened, things I remembered clearly, didn't actually happen. I had no idea what gaslighting even was back then, but I went along with it, thinking I was the one who was wrong. I was blinded by how much I cared for her. My friends began to notice something was off. They'd tell me, "You deserve better," or "She's not treating you right," but I ignored them. I thought they didn't understand what we had. I thought she was worth it. It's funny how easy it is to look back and see the warning signs, but in the moment, you convince yourself it'll all work out. After a year of this, I kept bringing up the idea of becoming official. If we were already exclusive, why not admit it? But she kept resisting, using her past as an excuse. "I'm not ready," she'd say, "but you're the best guy I've ever been with." Her words felt like validation, even though her actions told a different story. All her friends knew we were together, but for some reason, she kept us a secret from everyone else. I met her friends a few times, but I wasn't a fan. They were cliquish, and I always felt out of place around them. They also had a cat, and I'm allergic, so that was my excuse not to hang out with them more often. As time passed, we still went on dates, and every night she'd call me. We'd stay on the phone until one of us fell asleep. She told me I was comforting to her, that my voice helped her deal with her depression and helped her sleep. At the time, it felt like I was doing something good, like I was helping her heal. But there were darker moments too. Twice, she slapped me. Not because we were fighting, but because she thought it would be funny. Both times, I made it clear that wasn't okay. I told her I'd never lay a hand on her, and I expected the same in return. I should have seen it then, how little respect she had for me. But I was too far gone, too deep into whatever twisted version of love this was. One of the worst moments happened during a fight when she said something I'll never forget. My roommate knows plenty of guys around here who would be up for no-strings makeouts, so I don't really need you. She said it with this casual arrogance, like I was disposable. I was shocked, hurt, but somehow, I convinced myself it was just a heat-of-the-moment thing. But those words stayed with me. They planted a seed of doubt that would only grow. Eventually, after over a year of dating, she finally agreed to be my girlfriend. It felt like I had won some sort of battle, but there was still something off. She kept our relationship a secret from everyone except her family. I thought it was strange, but I was so caught up in thinking I'd finally gotten what I wanted that I ignored it. I should have paid more attention to the signs. She still acted distant, like there was a part of her I could never reach. We talked about the future, marriage, kids, everything. Yet something about her responses always felt rehearsed, like she was telling me what I wanted to hear. It's not like I was perfect either. I struggled with my own issues, depression, stress from work and school. Sometimes, it all became too much, and I'd lash out. I never hurt her physically, but I'd bring up things she had done that hurt me, and we'd end up in another fight. Our relationship was full of these toxic cycles. We'd break up, sometimes because of me, sometimes because of her, but we always found a way back to each other. It felt like we were trapped in this endless loop. One time, I did something I regret to this day. After one of our breakups, I self-harmed. It was a desperate, twisted attempt to show her how much she was hurting me. I thought it would make her understand, but all it did was push us deeper into our dysfunction. To be fair, she had also self-harmed in the past and talked about being suicidal during our relationship, so emotional manipulation was a two-way street for us. Still, I hate that I let myself go that far. Despite everything, I was convinced I loved her. She told me she loved me too. We had conversations about marriage and even talked about how many kids we'd have. But all of that seemed like a distant fantasy compared to the reality of what we were living. During this time, she moved twice, first to an apartment just down the street and then to her parents' house about an hour north. When she lived nearby, I was over there constantly. One time, she threw a party, and after it was over, none of her friends stayed to help clean. It was just me, picking up the pieces. She told me that was proof I'd make a good husband. I should have recognized how she used moments like that to manipulate me, but at the time, I saw it as some sort of validation. When she moved back to her parents' place, the dynamic shifted. I started visiting her nearly every weekend, but I began to notice how distant she was becoming. Her responses to my texts got slower and shorter. When she wanted something from me, I had to respond right away, but when I needed her, she was always too busy or going through something. Still, when she called or texted late at night, I would drop everything, even if it was 1 a.m. and I had work or school the next day. After a couple of months of this, I brought up the idea of getting engaged. I thought maybe it would bring us closer, but she brushed it off, using the same excuses she always had. She brought up her past trauma, her depression, anything to avoid commitment. Then she said something that really took me by surprise. She wanted to go back to casually dating. It was one of the dumbest decisions of my life, but I agreed. I convinced myself it would prove I was the right guy for her, that by giving her space, she'd come around. I couldn't have been more wrong. Over the next few months, she started going on dates with other guys, and she'd tell me all about them. How they didn't measure up, how I was better than any of them. I stayed loyal, thinking that if I just held on long enough, she'd realize I was the one for her. I was so blinded by my feelings that I couldn't see how humiliating the situation was. I had told her that if she found someone she really wanted to be with, I'd step aside and let her pursue him. It was a painful lie I told myself to keep the peace. But as time went on, I began to see things for what they really were. After talking to my friends and family, I had a realization. I was doing everything for her, but she wasn't giving me anything in return. I was still bending over backward to be there for her, and she wasn't even my girlfriend anymore. That was the moment I decided to take a stand. I told her we should stop any physical relationship until we got back to being exclusive. She agreed, but it didn't last. We'd go on dates, and she'd guilt-trip me, pressure me, until eventually, I'd give in. Then, right after, she'd flip the script. She'd get angry and say things like, "Why couldn't you resist? Why didn't you stop me?" It was this cruel game of manipulation that left me feeling confused and powerless. She became more hurtful as time passed. The worst was when she told me that if she ever got pregnant, she wouldn't tell me. She said she'd make all the decisions on her own and keep me in the dark. That hurt more than anything, knowing how much I wanted to be a father someday. That comment about pregnancy stuck with me. It hit me hard because I had always wanted to be a father, and the idea that she could cut me out of such a huge part of my life made me feel utterly powerless. But instead of walking away, we fought, made up, and the cycle continued. Every time I thought about leaving, she would do or say something to pull me back in. It was like she knew exactly how to keep me hooked, even when I knew deep down things weren't right. Despite all of this, she would still talk about a future together, about marriage, about kids. Whenever she saw a mixed-race baby, I'm Latino and she's white, she would say, "That could be our baby." It was these little glimpses of a future that kept me holding on, even though I knew they were empty promises. Things really started to unravel during Christmas that year. I went to Florida to visit my brother, and while I was away, she became more distant than ever. I'd text her, and she'd either take forever to reply or wouldn't respond at all. When I'd call, she wouldn't pick up. The one time she did call, it was only to ask if I had a certain movie on DVD. She said she wanted to watch it with her family, but I could sense something was off. When I got back from my trip, she came to my university, supposedly to see me, but something was different. She had lost her Fitbit and called me for help, but the energy between us had shifted. She told me she wanted to talk in a couple of days at her parents' house, and I already knew what was coming. I talked to my friends, and they all told me to prepare for the worst. So, when I drove up to her parents' house 2 days later, I was ready. She asked me to come late, around 10 p.m., which already felt strange. She got into my car, and we talked for about 30 minutes. Finally, she told me she no longer wanted to be with me. I took a deep breath and told her I had felt her becoming distant for a while. Then I asked the question I had been dreading, "Is there someone else?" She denied it, of course. She claimed she just didn't think we were right for each other anymore. But then she said something that hit me like a punch to the gut. She admitted that she had never seen me as husband material, that she had never truly pictured us getting married or having kids. And then she said something even worse. "I don't want my kids to look like you." She was talking about my Latino heritage. After all the conversations we had about having a family, about mixed-race kids, she threw that in my face. I couldn't believe it. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what she had just said. I told her I loved her, but I agreed it was over. We decided to go no contact. She blocked me on Facebook and said it was because she knew I wouldn't be able to keep her blocked if it were up to me. That hurt, but I let it go. We didn't block each other's phone numbers, just in case of an emergency, but I knew this was the end. As I drove away that night, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I was heartbroken, but at the same time, a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the next month, it was rough. I would lie awake at night, missing the late-night calls, the toxic routine we had built together. I realized I had become codependent on her, even though she had treated me so badly. I tried to throw myself into work, school, and spending time with friends. Slowly, I started to feel better. But then, about a month later, I got a call from her. It was early in the morning, and I thought it was an emergency. When I answered, I didn't hear her say anything. Instead, it sounded like she had but dialed me. I could hear her talking to a guy, and although I couldn't make out the whole conversation, I distinctly heard my name come up. That was the moment everything clicked. I reached out to some mutual friends, and sure enough, she had been dating someone else. I wasn't surprised, but it still stung. When I confronted her about it, she admitted that she had been seeing someone. She told me she missed my friendship, and for a brief moment, we talked like nothing had changed. But it didn't take long for me to realize I was done. I told her we shouldn't talk anymore, and she agreed. A few weeks later, I found out she got engaged. It had only been 3 months since we broke up. That was when it all made sense. The distance, the lies, the way she had pulled away during Christmas. She had been with him all along. But in the end, I got the last laugh. She might have moved on, but I had finally regained my sense of self-worth. Bye-bye.